Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are excited to have Dr. Michael Biamonte on our podcast today talking about the gut monster and Candida. As you guys know, if you follow us before, we talk about how important gut health is. I'm going to let Janet kind of go into that now before we wait for Michael to get connected.
So most people don't realize that our GI tract is our internal skin. It's actually really important. It will demonstrate itself externally too if it's not healthy on the inside. But we think about it in many ways as far as in functional health, because it's a source of a lot of health issues for many people if it's not correct. For one thing, we forget that our digestion starts in our mouth and it goes all the way through. And how that process continues to work in a healthy way is really important because different things can manifest if it's off. And with the typical American diet and how we eat processed foods, it's really changed the microbiome inside, which also will change some of the things that our gut is supposed to do for our overall health. One example would be acne. A lot of times, acne is a result of what we've put in our body. Another would be skin conditions such as eczema. Our skin is a result of what we've been eating. Another place that it is very effective on is, of course, the absorption of nutrients for like bone health or even our muscles, our brain health. So we can't get away and put our gut into just a little square, like we compartmentalize medicine today. We act like it doesn't affect other parts of our body, but it does.
Absolutely, it does. And when Janet was talking about eczema, one of the things we need to understand about eczema is another definition or definition of eczema, or what we call it, is atopic dermatitis. And atopic means it's not topical. A means without topic. It's not topical. So it basically means it's internal. Eczema is caused internally. So to take drugs that you apply topically are just symptom relief only. They're not really fixing the problem. So definitely realize that. We definitely are what we eat, like Janet said. And without our gut health, we can't be healthy. I mean, all the nutrients that we intake, whether it be macronutrients like proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, or micronutrients like B vitamins and minerals, the micronutrients, we ingest almost all of those through our gut. So if we don't have a healthy gut, we are not going to be the nutrients we eat are not going to be absorbed well. So and Canada is a great example of problems in our gut, and Michael is going to talk more about that when he gets on. And one of the ways to have a healthy gut is, like Janet says, don't eat processed foods, eat real foods. So our gut is full of good bacteria and good, why can't I think of the word?
Yeast.
Good yeast, good yeast and funguses. Yeah. And if those are, and those need to be fed, they're alive. They need to be fed with good nutrients. And unlike us, sometimes over the last 50 years, they're better at eating good nutrients and knowing the difference between good and bad nutrients. And for instance, that's one of the reasons we say on our podcast often, if food doesn't rot, don't eat it. Because essentially what I'm saying is that what makes food rot, besides oxidation, but what makes food rot is bacteria growing in it, fungus growing on it, which yeast is in the fungi category. Mold is a fungus. If those things won't grow on the food, chances are, if you eat that, it's not going to be assimilated into your body that well. Now, there's obviously, definitely exceptions to that rule. One of them being salt. I mean, salt by definition not by definition, but will preserve things, and funguses and bacteria can't live with a very high salinity, for one, with a very high salt load. So there's definitely exceptions, but in general, if it doesn't rot, don't eat it, because it's not going to be healthy for our gut, which means it's not going to be absorbed, which means in the end, it's not going to optimize our life. Janet?
That's so true. So, on a daily basis, our gut health really depends on our choices and our decisions. We've already hit the American processed food, and why that can be so disruptive is because of all the processed sugars. We don't have the balance of real food that break down slowly. It starts breaking down in our mouth before it even gets to our gut. But there's other things in our life that are changing our biome. And part of that could be, for example, if you drink alcohol every day, that's going to change the pH. But also, if you're taking pharmaceuticals, one of the things that we see very often or have to address very often with clients is they're on protein pump inhibitors
Proton.
such as Prilosec or Nexium, and it changes the pH of the stomach, which in a very short period of time might be okay if we have an acute situation, but they were never intended and should not be used long term. So when you have a client that's doing that, it's making the gut a higher pH, so it's more alkaline or basic. So our stomach actually changes physically over time, and that acidity that we need should be so acidic that it can eat through carpet for breaking down food has changed. And so that long term can result in some really bad things. Again, we talked about our brain health, but it's also our bone health and our muscles, because we're not absorbing the nutrients that we need for our body to be healthy.
Yeah, and Prilosec, Prevacid, Nexium, those proton pump inhibitors that she discussed are just strong antacids. And our stomachs, which is one of the first lines in our GI tract. It's our mouth and our esophagus, but our stomach is designed to be acidic. It's designed to be acidic to kill bad things and dissolve things. It's got a strong hydrochloric acid in it, a pH of about 1 if you're healthy. And that's a very, very strong acid, which can dissolve, food, minerals, micronutrients, and prevent any bad stuff from getting through our GI tract. And if that doesn't have a good pH, so if you're constantly taking strong antacids, and that could be, there's some other ones too, H2 blockers like Zantac, which I think is off the market now, and cimetidine, Pepcid, or if you're just eating Tums like candy because you always have that reflux, that's a problem too. You want our stomachs to be acidic. And Michael, welcome to our show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we were talking about gut health. So go ahead and fill us in about gut health and Candida.
Well, Candida, as you know, is a normal organism to find in your intestinal tract. The issue becomes when it overgrows. This is the point of a lot of controversy, because I constantly have patients tell me that they spoke to their doctor and told the doctor they have Candida, and he says everyone has Candida. So we're really only interested in the Candida overgrowth. When Candida becomes dominant part of your flora as opposed to a very subdominant or minor part, that's when it becomes a pathogen. That's when it releases various toxins which affect you neurologically, affect you in many ways. That's when it actually can act like cancer, because it can physically destroy tissues. Those people don't know this about Candida. Candida actually is very similar to cancer in that sugar feeds it, fuels it, makes it grow, makes it accelerate, and it literally can eat into your tissues and destroy your tissues. As a matter of fact, when your body dies, the main purpose of Candida that I can see is, formaldehyde, embalming fluid, is nothing more than a huge dose of antifungal. And when your body dies, Candida is the substance which essentially decomposes your body. So when your body dies and you're embalmed, you're given a huge dose of antifungal fluid, which retards the Candida's growth and stops it from decomposing your body. So if you think about that, in lieu of the other things I'm saying, you can get a better idea of how dangerous it can be when it gets out of control. Most people just think of it in terms of yeast that causes vaginal infections. It's not that simple, because it can cause probably over 150 different symptoms, depending on how you want to divide them and count them. Things from rashes to imbalances in your hormones, allergies, mast cell activation, immune suppression and immune hyperactivity. Obviously, all types of digestive problems, which is an obvious thing. So it can go on. A key symptom about it when it overgrows is it causes cognitive problems. People will start forgetting things. Like when you get older, you start to joke about how you went into the room and you forgot why you went in there. Well, that happens all the time with people with Candida. So Candida essentially is the end result of something that imbalances your biome. Most people nowadays know what the word biome means. It's referring to the balance of friendly bacteria versus pathogenic bacteria or harmful bacteria in your gut. And when that balance, that delicate balance is thrown out, Candida starts to overgrow. Candida is normally controlled by bifidus bacteria and lactobacillus bacteria. It stops it from overgrowing. And when those bacteria are compromised, it then starts to overgrow. And an interesting thing that I found in my practice is that when COVID came around, we had a lot of patients who had completed our treatment years ago, suddenly came back and said that they were re-experiencing symptoms of Candida. So I looked into this and I found a Japanese research article that showed that the spike protein actually can destroy bifidus bacteria in your colon, which would be a major mechanism for suppressing Candida. So we can conclude from that COVID and the COVID vaccine can cause Candida.
Interesting.
It is interesting. And I think Dr. Sabine Hazen does a lot of research. Well, she does do a lot of research on the gut microbiome. And she talked about how COVID specifically does definitely affect the microbiome.
Very smartly engineered organism.
Yeah, for sure. So what caused it to overgrow, Michael?
What causes Candida to overgrow is essentially a lack of the governing factors, which are the protective bacteria. But you also get some other pathogenic bacteria with Candida that seem to be synergistic and symbiotic. One of them, which is very interesting, is H. pylori. For years, I've noticed that my patients who had both H. pylori and Candida were some of the more difficult cases. I never understood why, but recently in the last year, there have been some research studies that are now showing the correlation between these two organisms and how they're helpful to each other. There are some other organisms also. One is called Klebsiella, another is called Citrobacter, which you'll commonly find with Candida. And again, they appear to be both symbiotic and synergistic with each other.
So H. pylori, we shouldn't wipe it out, is what you're saying.
No, I'm saying no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying H. pylori is a pathogen. It's the bacteria responsible for stomach ulcers. It used to be called the corkscrew bacteria years ago, because that's literally how it behaves and what it looks like when you look at it. It corkscrews itself into your stomach lining, and that's how it creates an ulcer. And when it's present with Candida, it makes it harder to eliminate either one.
I see. Okay, I see.
So the treatment, when I graduated from pharmacy school, went away from using things like Zantac or Tegnet to a approach that we treat an infection. So when we add that antibiotic, did we just exacerbate that for people?
That's the rub, as Shakespeare would say, because the triple antibiotic treatment, along with bismuth, was the first real traditional treatment for H. pylori that got some results. But the problem now is that when you do that, you wipe out more of your friendly bacteria and the Candida gets worse. So I've designed various protocols for all these things, and I have botanical protocols that destroy the H. pylori using mastic gum, bismuth, and also different silver products, which work as an antibiotic, but seem not to really harm the friendly bacteria. And they've been very effective in getting rid of H. pylori without aggravating the problems with your biome.
And what about probiotics? What about, you talked about Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus. What about adding probiotics, those bacteria, back into your gut?
Here's the interesting thing. If you read my book, The Candida Chronicles, I take you through my entire journey of how I got into researching Candida and what I discovered. And one of the key axioms that I discovered about treating Candida is you don't use probiotics initially with the expectation of any kind of improvement, because probiotics are repelled by Candida and they're essentially repelled by pathogenic bacteria. So probiotics are a complete waste of time to take in the beginning of treating Candida. Where probiotics fit in is after you've reduced the Candida down to a closer normal level, then the probiotics are able to re-inoculate and stick to your gut lining. So the amazing thing is there's an interesting polarity game that goes on between probiotics and Candida. Candida physically repels the probiotics and stops them from sticking, just like the organism Blastocystis hominis does. It stops the probiotics from being able to stick to the gut lining. It's like a game of musical chairs in a way. So you've got to get the pathogens out of there. That's where we came up with years ago the 4 R's. You have to first remove, and then after you remove, you replace, because you can't do at the same time. 2 objects can't occupy the same spot in the physical universe at the same time, and this is especially true of your biome.
That makes a lot of sense, because I've seen so many clients come through and the first line they are given is probiotics, and they're just not.
It's a waste of money.
Yeah.
Years ago, I discovered when I was putting my Candida program together, I looked at everything that wasn't working, and I spoke to my other colleagues who were doing the same thing that wasn't working. What I mean by not working is the high incidence of relapse in people. And one of the first key things I discovered, which I talk about in my book, is that when you treat people with antifungals, whether they're pharmaceutical or botanical, the antifungals have to be rotated, because at a point of about 21 days of being exposed to any botanical or any medication, the Candida cells begin to mutate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've got about 21 days straight on any substance, and then after that point they start to mutate, and not only do they become drug resistant to that substance, but they can also jump species. Initially, when I was doing this work in my office in Manhattan, we were culturing everybody who came in. Everyone who came in, we just automatically did a stool culture. And the funny thing is we found that the people who didn't know what Candida was all had Candida albicans. All the people who were quite sophisticated and had been treating their Candida, self-treating or jumping from one doctor to the other, all had Candida tropicalis or Candida glabrata, which are mutated species. So that immediately told me that there was something wrong in the treatment that was going on. And that's where I discovered that you had to rotate antifungals. Otherwise, the person would just develop, or the Candida strain would just develop a drug resistance to them.
It makes sense. It wants to survive.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a path to stay there and be in the organism.
Absolutely.
So tell us about some of your treatment protocols and maybe a success story that you've had.
Well, the treatment, and this again is covered in my book pretty much in detail. The treatment protocols begin with our 0 phase. The phase 0 is essentially a colon cleanse for people to eliminate the surface area of pathogens, particularly parasites, because parasites, more particularly protozoa, and one of them in particular, Blastocystis hominis, can be very synergistic with Candida. If you were able to walk through your intestinal tract with a flashlight, you would see, a nice area, looks normal, has normal flora, but then all of a sudden you would come up to this area that had mucus, biofilm, bacteria, parasites, and yeast all sort of hidden or cuddled up together. That's what we want to eliminate in our first phase 0. It's a phase that works strictly mechanically, using things like diatomaceous earth and different types of fibers and different substances which literally dissolve the protein links that these organisms make to stick to the gut lining. So we physically, mechanically are removing those organisms off the surface. When that phase is over, we go to phase 1, which is where we rotate the botanicals that destroy the Candida throughout your body. Now, these botanicals will affect Candida in the digestive tract, but they also are absorbed into your lymph system, so they'll travel through your body and kill the Candida more or less systemically. You could think of it that way. Some examples of these botanicals that we use would be Lomatium, Spilanthes, the Biocidin product, Candibactin products from Metagenics. All these products, and also Colorex is another name brand that we use. All these products are able to be absorbed and destroy Candida systemically. When we finish with this phase, we concentrate now on the second phase of destroying the Candida, which is really deep in your intestinal tract. This is the really problematic Candida, because this is the Candida that prevents reinoculation by your probiotics. What I have found is, even though there are many substances that can destroy intestinal Candida, the best ones are the ones that are, I call them fatty acid antifungals, because these fatty acid antifungals are able to absorb really deep in your intestinal tract. And much like oil would soak into leather, they're able to really get in there and destroy the Candida at its roots, which is an issue because Candida does grow roots. When you look at it under a microscope, it looks like broccoli or cauliflower, but it has roots that look for blood vessels to tap into those blood vessels and get glucose. This is why you can't get rid of Candida by fasting, because as long as you're alive and your body's breaking down your own muscle tissue and converting it into glucose, the Candida is going to get the glucose. So fasting can help, but it doesn't get rid of it. Anyway, that's a tangent. So at that point on the phase 2, we're destroying a deep intestinal Candida. And the whole purpose for doing this is so that we can then introduce the probiotics and have them actually stick. And another thing I found out, which I discuss in the book, is once you've had Candida, I can't say that Candida causes permanent damage to your intestines, but it does upset things enough where it takes more effort than you would think to get the probiotics to reinoculate. You have to not only use probiotics, but you have to use a whole series of prebiotics to really get them to start multiplying. It's not just as simple as you take one probiotic pill and you're good. Other thing I discovered was that, and I did this with I don't know if you guys remember the Great Smokies Laboratory in North Carolina. Yeah. Now they're called Genova Labs. I was very fortunate to have Steve Barry and Marty Lee become friends of mine, and they allowed my patients to do free testing so that we could track how well probiotics were working. And we found that probiotics really wouldn't stick until we first introduced intestinal antifungals. So the moral of this story is that when you try to take probiotics again too early, they're not going to stick, and you've got to eliminate that Candida that's there blocking them. But we also saw that bifidus bacteria taken orally really didn't ever show up in the cultures, very rarely. So we developed this procedure, which all the patients love, of taking an enema with the bifidus bacteria to directly get it in there. And that's I found that to be like 95% successful. Is you put the bifidus bacteria in an enema bag with a small amount of water, and you take it as an implant. You hold it as long as you can or overnight. And that is a guaranteed way to get that bifidus to come back. Because when you take it orally, it's too far of a trip for it to survive.
So what about Saccharomyces boulardii?
That's one of the items we use on our probiotic phase.
And will you talk a little bit about that, as opposed, because since it's not a bacteria?
What's a yeast? Most people, a lot of my patients call it Casper because it's a friendly yeast, just like Casper the Friendly Ghost. And Saccharomyces, essentially what it does is it stimulates fecal IgA. That's one of the key things about it that I think is really important. So when you do a targeted stool test and you see that someone's fecal IgA is low, Saccharomyces is going to rehabilitate that and bring their immune response back up. What it does in your biome, it crowds around pathogens, particularly crowds around yeast, and essentially tries to suffocate it by crowding around it and not giving it room to move around or replicate or breathe. That's one of the main functions of it.
It's amazing how all these organisms, work synergistically or against each other to benefit, to kill one, to help another one out. I mean, it's definitely a symphony going on.
That's like a whole little culture down there.
Yeah, for sure. So what are when people show up in your office with Candida problems, what are their major symptoms? What should they be looking for?
That's a good question. So theoretically, what's supposed to happen is when you first develop Candida, one of the first things you notice is your energy crashes, and you don't know why. And you start having cognitive issues. You start forgetting things. And then you notice you're starting to have gas and bloating and maybe burp. If your HCl is low, you're getting burping. You're having all these digestive problems. And then if you're aware enough, you'll start to notice strange reactions to foods you never reacted to before. Typically, foods that contain any type of yeast, even food yeast, you'll have allergies to. And you'll start having strange reactions to sugar or carbs or beer, things like you might have handled before and now making you bloat horribly. If you drink alcohol, you'll have whatever your standard alcohol is, and you'll be hungover for 3 or 4 days instead of maybe a few hours like you used to be. And when it gets really bad, the person's going to start having what we used to call universal reactive syndrome, where you're just reacting to everything in your environment. Any chemical smell, chemical odor. You can't go to a bar where there's smoke and perfume. You can't walk down the aisle of the supermarket where the cleaning solutions are. You'll just be wiped out by it. That's what you typically want to expect. However, I can tell you, I've heard the craziest stories in my life. People who had Candida, the weirdest symptoms, strangest symptoms. And I was telling someone this story just the other day. We had a patient who had Candida, and she was doing okay. She was recovering, and then all of a sudden her symptoms got worse, even though her Candida was getting better. And to make a long story short, we traced it down to a person who moved in to the apartment next to her, who was doing research on molds and aspergillus. And this person was growing all this mold and aspergillus in their apartment, and some of the mold spores were getting in her apartment, and she was reacting allergically to them. Now, I never would have figured that took a while to figure out, but these are the kind of things that can occur. And environmental stimulation, you could say, can be stunning when in Candida patients. There's a lot of awareness now about sick building syndrome, which essentially is a building or a house that's loaded with mold and it's making people sick. The interesting thing I've found about this is that when you go to one of these homes and you start talking to the people there, if 5 people live there, 2 of them, 1 or 2 is going to be really severely affected, and the other ones kind of shrug it off and will say, well, yeah, I see there's a problem. I have to blow my nose sometimes or I cough. But he or she is really affected by this. They're like flattened out by it. And the person who's the most affected is the person usually who has Candida overgrowth. That's how you can tell in that house who has Candida chronically and who doesn't. Whoever's the most severely affected, and to the point of not being able to really carry on their life correctly. But yet when they leave that house for a few days, they're like a new person.
Wow. So as we wrap this podcast up, tell us what you have a passion for.
Particularly is getting people well, because I love to hear the stories. I just love hearing the stories about people who are able to return to work, return to school, return to having a normal life. It's the biggest kick you could ever have when you see where they were and how they were just struggling for their own sanity because they didn't really understand or couldn't fully grip what was wrong with them. It just made no sense. It was a mystery. Doctors kept telling them there's nothing wrong with you, blah, blah, blah. And then when they finally get an answer and they finally start to get well and they start becoming productive again, there's just nothing like that in the world.
So if anybody has any questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Your website?
Yeah, I have 3 websites. One website is health-truth.com. I have 2 other websites. One is the New York City Candida Doctor, and the other is the New York City Thyroid Doctor. Now, I want to say something about that for a sec here. Why I have a thyroid website. Candida and thyroid problems are really heavily linked. In fact, there's a large group of physicians out there who believe all cases of Hashimoto's are caused by Candida and leaky gut syndrome, which is another interesting phenomenon. So I've done a lot of research into this, and I've done a lot of research into why it is that people who are diagnosed with low thyroid, who are taking medication, just never seem to feel right.
Yeah.
You'll hear this all the time. You'll hear, well, the doctor put me on T4 or T3. I felt a little better, but I just don't feel correct. Well, if you look into the work of David L. Watts from Trace Elements Inc., Dr. Watts was able to determine mineral, you could call them receptors for thyroid hormone. To make a long story short, you could be on all the thyroid stuff in the world and you could still not be utilizing your thyroid hormone. And this is something that won't show in your blood work.
Yeah.
The first book that discussed this was Broda Barnes, who wrote a book called Hypothyroidism, The Unsuspected Illness. And Barnes talked about taking your body temperature as a way to assess your thyroid function. Then Dr. Wilson had Wilson syndrome. He talked about reverse T3. So we've taken this a bit farther, where we can actually identify by doing a mineral analysis of a person's hair. We can identify the minerals that are involved with your body's utilization of the thyroid hormone, not the production of the hormone. Your blood levels will show you production of hormone. But in terms of how does your body utilize that hormone when the hormone enters the electron transport chain and the mitochondria, that's something that depends on trace minerals. And we've identified 2 mineral ratios. One is calcium to potassium, the other is zinc to copper. And if these ratios are off, you could be taking all the thyroid in the world and your body's just not going to be utilizing it well because your tissues are not going to be sensitive to the hormone. You have to have that balance of those trace minerals. And that's something that can make a whole world of difference in a thyroid patient. And a lot of those minerals are thrown off by, guess what? Candida.
Mm-hmm.
Candida causes your body to build up excess copper very often in your tissues, and also excessive calcium levels, which nullify or make your body's tissues less sensitive to thyroid hormones. And this is even in Guyton's physiology book. Guyton wrote many years ago, and I think the exact quote was, in some ways not fully understood yet, calcium desensitizes your tissues to the effect of thyroxine, where potassium sensitizes the tissues. And we found out later that behind calcium and potassium was zinc and copper, also modulating that ratio.
Trace minerals are very important. That is absolutely true. So, Dr. Biamonte, thank you for being on our podcast today and educating us about this subject. You have a wealth of knowledge. You've helped us reach our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So I appreciate you being on today.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning into Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Monday, our regularly scheduled podcast, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.